really none of your business. It's none of my business.
Hola, buenas tardes, bonsoir. It's Liam Printer here from the Motivated Classroom. This is day 27 of the August Spotlight. We're getting to the end of it, and there's still some amazing interviews to look over. And this is one in that series of social justice issues. We've already had the episodes featured from Ben Tinsley and Maud Warrett about decolonising our curriculum and centering Black and Brown voices in what we teach. And this episode, number 73, was with the wonderful Françoise Thenoux. And this was a brilliant episode all about really the very difficult job of looking inwardly at our own privilege and positionality and the way and how we teach and how this can impact our biases, and being okay with that being a little bit uncomfortable and that almost guilty feeling of, I've grown up in a privileged situation. It feels weird talking about this stuff, but to kind of recognize that, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. The work is really important. And many of the languages we are teaching, as Françoise brought it to our attention, Spanish is a subordinate language in the United States. And she did that great example where she is discriminated against as a native speaker because she is an accent, but someone who has decided to learn the language and gone out of their way to do it, like me, for example, in the United States, because I speak Spanish, I'm not going to be marginalized or discriminated against. Probably the opposite. I'll be raised up for, oh, aren't you great for learning Spanish? But if it's your native language and you have the accent, then you can often suffer from that discrimination. And that's a really important point to make. We made the decision to study these languages, but we are talking about languages and people and places, in particular for us as Spanish teachers, that are subject to a lot of discrimination and racism when they speak their own language. So some of the things she said that I thought were great. She started off by saying languages are part of people's identities. We cannot perceive languages as something mechanical. When you're teaching language, you're not just teaching grammar, you're not just teaching vocabulary, you're actually engaging with groups of people. So when you engage in this practice of teaching languages, because this goes for social studies, homeroom teachers, whoever, you have to realize that we're not teaching anything without context. Everything is immersed in the real world that we live in. And in the real world we live, there is white supremacy and there is inequity and there is inequality. So that's the approach a teacher should have in teaching anything, but especially languages, because languages are part of who we are. Basically, we were talking about people saying, oh, you shouldn't use your language classroom as a politics statement or to talk about politics, and this, you should keep these things out of the class, that's politics. And she made that great thing, just saying that it's not politics. Like, she just brought this really lovely part to it. And first she said language is connected to our emotions, to who we are, how we use languages to actually create relationships. And when you see languages like that, you understand that you cannot separate it from the causes and struggles and the privilege of the people speaking those languages. That's why teaching language is so beautiful. It's complex, it's nuanced. Language is the way we relate. It's part of us. It helps us build relationships, see different perspectives, and of course to see our own perspective. And, I just thought that was really interesting. And that bit about politics, like I asked her about, what about those people who say you should keep politics out of the classroom? And she says, when you're open to learn, when you're open to listen, when you're open to empathize, and also when you're open to see what your ancestors did, it makes you feel guilty and horrible. And that guilt, it's quite a normal feeling, but we should move from guilt to what can I do to improve the situation? But if there's no acknowledging that something is wrong, there's no way to change it. Like, what is politics? Really, being a decent human being is politics. Being a humanitarian and caring about others is politics. Trying to fight for equity and equality is politics. It might have turned into politics, the teaching of languages she means here, because politicians are using this as a tool, especially those around the world, to manipulate people. And she's really right in that it's impossible to talk or teach about language without having some kind of political stance, if that's the way you want to call it. But as she just said, these are just talking about humanity and love and acceptance and inclusion and being a good person to other people and being open to people who are different to you. And that is politics. And she made that great point about, politics. When people think politics, they think of these, rich men in suits in their lovely log cabin smoking a cigar. They don't care about what you're doing. But the people who really care are the ones in the streets, the ones who are protesting. And that's the true politics. That's the one of really trying to get change. And then Some of the other things that she spoke about was, people wanting like a kind of a checklist or quick fixes for diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice. And she said teachers and administrators want a checklist for social justice. They want a quick strategy. And let me tell you, this is messy and complex. As I said, you need to start with deconstructing things yourself. There's no strategy. What you can do is refine and redefine your own lens. If you don't have the lens to look at this stuff properly, you're going to mess it up anyway. So what I tell teachers is refine your lens first and foremost, deconstruct your own privilege, and don't demonize the cultures and languages that you're teaching about. That's not the way to go. In that sense, she was talking about the negative aspects of the culture and making it like that's what represents the culture. If you're talking about, she gave the example of misogyny in Latin America, and she was like, yes, we have misogyny in Latin America. It's a big issue, but there's misogyny all over the place. And if we just talk about that in our Spanish class, well, then you're constructing a reality for students that, misogyny is rife in Latin America. Whereas it could be right around you in the classroom, it could be outside, it could be in the street, and it probably is. And to kind of bring it into a reality that, yes, these things exist, but they exist everywhere. And why aren't we talking about the fact that, as she said, Chile has had 2 female presidents? We don't mention that. Or the fact that the US has never had one, those kind of comparisons. And then she was talking a bit about translanguaging, which I liked. She said, I believe in proficiency, and I also believe in leveraging the student's mother tongue to learn new language. I'm a big fan of Dr. Jose Medina, Nelson Flores, Dr. Rosa, and translanguaging. And what I do when I do these topics is I try to build a bridge. So, for example, if I'm teaching about Frida Kahlo in 1st grade, and we're in a moment where I teach bilingually, I use both languages so students can understand the story in its complexity. But after class, I was reading, and when I was reading to them, I was reading in Spanglish, a mix of two. I was able to do an identity map with them in Spanish, where I was using the language as the language there that's spoken in this book was Spanish. And I know the teachers who are teaching a language that's not their first language, this is going to be a lot harder. But my point is, and she says this, don't be afraid to use whatever language you need to leverage the content. And she ended with these tips. How can you construct yourself in a way that you're going to leverage your privilege in the service of those who are marginalized? What a wonderful sentence. And at the same moment, humanize yourself into deconstructing your own reality and helping others improve theirs. So using the position and power we have as teachers to, as she says, in the service of those who are marginalized, but also to use that to humanize yourself and think about your own privilege and positionality and how that impacts things. We as teachers, especially language teachers, hold a lot of power in our classroom. And Bell Hooks said that the classroom is the radical space where everything can change. And then she paraphrases saying, acknowledging that we are not doing something that's not relevant. We are doing something that is really important. When we see the gravity of this, we can be more responsible. And maybe it's not about the quantity. I think she meant the proficiency and how much phrases and words they have, but the quality of those words and phrases. Think about impact. It's more important than intent. Think about impact. Less sometimes is more. So, muchas gracias to Françoise Thenoux for a wonderful episode, for really making us think carefully about our own positionality and privilege. Hasta mañana.